let's talk about the use of gematria in Revelation. So what we mean by this, it's a method, it's a Kabbalistic method of interpreting Hebrew scriptures by computing the numerical value of words. So they believe that words have got numerical values based on the values of their constituent letters. So each letter has a particular value, and now the sum of those letters, they give the value of that particular word, so it can be a noun. Now, biblical Hebrews, the biblical Hebrew uses the normal letters of alphabets that you know, not only to represent the sounds of words, like we use our letters in English, but also to represent numbers. This is, sometimes they use, letters to represent numbers, not only to represent sounds of words, but also to represent numbers. For instance, Aleph can be used as a letter for spelling words, or it can also stand as number 1. Likewise, the second letter, Beth, the second letter of the alphabet can also stand for number 2, and so forth, throughout the alphabet up to number 9. Then consecutive letters, they now represent 10, 20 in terms of numerical value. They give 30 and so on, up to 90. Then followed letters, now the 100, 900, and so forth and so on. So John is aware of this, and we want to see whether he makes use of this method in Revelation. Now, in this system, this gematria, the letters in certain words are analyzed for their mathematical value, and then they are equated with other words to have the same value. I'll explain. Let me give you an example. For instance, the Hebrew word father, which is ab in Hebrew, A-B, ab, comprises the two letters Aleph and Beta, and Beth. So these two ones, so we've got, in terms of numerical value, so you give the first letter the numerical value 1, the second letter the numerical value 2. So which means the word father in Hebrew is the combination of 1 and 2. The sum of 1 plus 2 is 3, which means the numerical value of father in Hebrew, the numerical value is 3. And mother is E, letter E and M. And what they do is they see for father, you've got 3 as value, and for mother, it is it's comprised with the letter Aleph in Hebrew and Mem. Now, Aleph is 1 numerical value, and Mem is 40, which means 41. So mother has 41 as numerical value. Father in Hebrew has 3 as numerical value, and then sometimes they play with these words. And then what about child? The word child, which is Yod in Hebrew. So Lamed, Yod, it's Yaled. Yod has got 10. You've got 3 letters there, so 10 plus 30 plus 4, which equals to 44. So in short, what we want to say is that the word child has got 44 value in terms of numerical value, child. And the word father has got 3, and the word mother has got, what did I say? 41. So now they bring together and they say, which means father, which is 3, plus mother, which is 41, equals to child, which is 44. Okay, this is an example to just illustrate a simple type of analysis with gematria. So The mechanics of gematria sometimes, however, can be very complicated, employing various types of addition, subtraction, multiplication. Sometimes they bring all of these things together. Not only addition, multiplication, it becomes more complicated. Now, most modern scholars find a reference of Nero in Revelation 13, verse 18, where it says the number of the beast is said to be 666. Since this number is also called the number of his name, is the number of his name in 13 verse 17, even chapter 15 verse 2. So John, the writer of the gospel, the writer of Revelation, has usually and rightly been supposed to be employing the ancient practice of a gematria, whereby any words could be given a numerical value, and we want to prove that. And I'll come back to that. Now, since the letters of both Greek and Hebrew alphabets were all used as numbers, they were not just used as to bring sounds, but sometimes used as numbers, it is possible to add up the numerical value of each letter of any Greek or Hebrew words and obtain the number of that word, the value. This is generally supposed and is what it will be the word to calculate. So the Greek word for to calculate, because this is what John is asking his readers. So whoever has wisdom, let him calculate. So the word that has been translated in our Bibles, like to calculate, it is in Greek is psephisato, the number of the beasts. That's the verb that he uses, psephisato, the number of the beast, in chapter 13, verse 18. John is inviting the reader who has intelligence. Now, the word intelligence, again, in Greek there, you find he uses the participle o herkon nun, meaning the one who has intelligence. In other words, he has to reckon, he has to calculate, he has to figure out. So maybe a good way of translating is who can figure out this, let him calculate the numerical value of the beast name and find it. It is 666. Now, this practice of gematria is well attested in both Jewish and pagan circles in the ancient world. It was used in various ways. Most relevant because of Revelation's specific phrase, the number of his name. It is the number of his name. Are cases where a name is given a numerical value. Now, here's a good example of one of the Roman emperors. So sometimes you can use this technique if you want to conceal the name of someone, or even when you want to pose a riddle. Okay? Sometimes the number that you use functions as a way of concealing someone's name. You don't want to expose, you just conceal, or you just bring the value. Or sometimes you want to pose a riddle for the reader to solve. Here's a good example of one of the Roman emperors. So he was speaking in public, and he says, I love the girl whose number is 545. I love the girl whose number is 545. So sometimes they use this in order to conceal the number, the name of the girl, or sometimes just to pose the riddle. Okay. So presumably the person himself herself can know. The beloved herself is expected to recognize the numerical value of her name. So I love the girl whose number is 545. So the concerned person might probably know that this is the value of my name. But few others would take the trouble to work out which name was this numerical value. Because sometimes they use that in order to conceal someone's name, or sometimes just to pose a riddle. So the Jewish and Christian way of using this it was there in the first century, second century. It was used, and John, we think that the way John uses numbers, sometimes he makes use of this um, and he expected his readers to understand. Now, when you make you take Nero, and then you work out the numerical value, you will expect to see that it is exactly the 666. And now the problem now is, why is he talking about Nero and yet is living during the time when Nero was not alive? Because Nero committed suicide in 68 AD, and is writing the book of Revelation during the time of Domitian. There are so many good reasons why he's talking, because John is using the Nero figure to bring about the theology of persecution, because Nero was the first actually emperor to bring persecution against the Christians, at least in the city of Rome, which was severe. And during his time now, Domitian also brought back officially the persecution of believers. Now, what John is doing in chapter 13 is to say, there was a belief, there was a legend, there was a story that was going around after the death of Nero, that he did not actually die. Some people believed he did not actually die. He just migrated, in the nearby cities there, and then he was going to come back later to take over. And some people thought, no, he actually died, but he was going to come back. So those beliefs, they started going round toward from the 68 AD all the way up to end of first century. They used to call it a Nero Revivius in Latin, which means the rebirth or the return of Nero. So the return of Nero was already around even during the time when John is writing the Revelation. So everybody was aware of the idea that Nero was going to come back. For those who believe that he died, they thought probably he's going to resurrect and come back. For those who said no, he did not die, he hid himself somewhere. So whichever belief that was going around, but the legend was the reality of the day. So everybody knew that he was going to come back. Now, John uses what everybody knows, everybody knew about it, to work out the theology of the persecution that is going to come back. So he's talking about whatever you experienced, the believers experience, is now back probably in the form of Domitian. So the beast of chapter 13 has got a wound that has been healed, in chapter 13, verse 3. So, and that one also is connected to the same legend of the emperor, the beast who is going to come back again. In other words, is to say persecution will never die. Will never die. It will always come back in different forms, So Nero is gone, Nero is back. He's here, he's with us. So Nero as the principle behind persecution. So the name of Nero is associated with anything to do with the persecution of believers in those lines. And the principle behind is that you might think that it is gone, but here it is. Persecution will always be the reality. It's like Nero is back in that sense. So he uses the same belief that was already circulating toward the end of first century to bring the principle of saying that the reality of persecution will always be there. That's the point I want to make. So, and why is he using Nero? Because that's what everybody knew. Nero is a person knew, everybody knew that he brought persecution. He killed many believers and Christians in the city of Rome. So he was the right candidate to associate whatever persecution in the first century. So if John lived like in our time, he was probably going to use any other figure that everybody else will be able to relate in terms of persecution. The idea is to convey that persecution that in this particular person. So it's not like sticking to one person. So Nero is the right candidate in the context of the reader to bring to mind anything they know about persecution. And so he's talking about Nero 666, is the beast in terms of relating the idea of persecution. I don't know if I'm able to communicate this point anyway. So let me talk now about what is so significant about 666. Why if we can call that coincidence, humanly speaking, we can use that coincidence, but it's not coincidence. There's providence of God in associating and all the numbers John has picked 666 to depict, to talk about the beasts and anything to do with persecution, anything with persecuting power. I want to go to the relationship between the significance of 666 in relation and relationships between its arithmetic value. This is what I want to explain now. Now, the Pythagorean arithmetic represented numbers by figures made with pebbles. And this is important. The reason it is important is because this is the exactly word that John uses in Revelation in Greek, psephoi, psephoi, pebbles. So the numbers were being represented, made with pebbles, and hence the verb that is used for calculation in Greek, is very close to the same term. So John uses the verb, psephizo, where we get the psephoi, the pebbles, in the sense of to count or to calculate. When he says anyone can count, the one with wisdom can calculate. So what comes to mind is the same way of representing numbers using figures made with pebbles. That's so the readers would pick that very, very fast in Revelation chapter 13, verse 18. Now there are three types of numbers: triangular numbers, square numbers, and rectangular numbers. They are all conceived as triangular, square, and rectangular shapes in terms of shape. Now let's see how John makes use of these numbers in Revelation and why 666 is very significant. Let's start with what we call as a triangular number. A triangular number, is the sum of successive numbers like 1 plus 2, plus 3. So the sum of successive numbers is what we call triangular numbers. Thus, 10, for instance, number 10 is the triangle of 4. Why 10 is a triangle of 4 is because we get 10, 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4, we get 10. So which means 10 is a triangle of, 10 is a triangle of 4. So which means a sum of successive numbers is where we get triangular numbers. So John gets triangular numbers, he associates with something to do with evil. I will explain that in a minute. Square number is the sum of successive odd numbers. For instance, 1 plus 3 plus 5 plus 7. For example, number 16 is the sum of all the odd numbers up to 7. 1 plus 3 plus 5 plus 7, we get 16. So which means such number, they represent a square number. So that the first 4 square numbers, 1, 4, 9, 16, they are square numbers. So I know you may be confused here and there, but you will understand where I'm going. Now, a rectangular number is the sum of successive even numbers, like 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 8. For example, 20 is the sum of all the even numbers up to 8, which means 2 plus 4 plus 6 plus 8 equals to 20. Now, such numbers can be represented as rectangle in terms of the shape. Now, the triangular number, they are represented in terms of triangle. The shape is triangle. And the square number in terms of a square, and the rectangular number in terms of a rectangle. So such numbers can be represented as rectangles in which one side is 1 unit longer than the other, so that the first 4, 2, 6, 12, 20 can be represented. Now we want to see what John makes use of these numbers now in Revelation. Are we just trying to read too much in Revelation, or is it something that John was aware and the readers were aware, And what really convinces a lot of readers that for sure John is making use of these numbers is how consistent he is in using these numbers. It's very consistent, and he has particular reasons why he attaches numbers to certain particular characters or events in Revelation. Remember, we've already identified the principal characters in Revelation, and then even in terms of numbers, John picks these numbers and then he attributes them, associates them to characters in the story. So let's look at the peculiarity of 666 in its mathematical value. It is very unique. So for this way of understanding arithmetic, 666 is a remarkable number. In the first place, it is a doubly triangular number. I will explain in a minute what it means. And to find numbers like that is in the series is very rare. So in other words, it is 666 is a triangle of 36, which means 1 plus 2 plus 3 all the way up to 36. That's where you get 666. And also the peculiarity comes in because 36 also is a triangular number as well. So, and 36 is also a triangular number, the triangle of 8. Such doubly triangular numbers are rare. The series runs from 1, 6, 21, 55, 120. You'll see in the table that I'm going to show you all the way up to 66. And so it seems rather unlikely that the number of the beast should be one of these numbers, purely accidental. It's not just accidental, where 66 is very peculiar in the series, where it is just a doubly triangular number. Because to find a triangular number in the series is not something you get so easily. More uniquely among these doubly triangular numbers is 666 looks likely a doubly triangular number. So the Greek number written is 6 would not make the impression of our 3 repeated digit, but written or said as it is in Greek there, the repetition of 6 would be apparent. Now we have two triangles of 6 sides. So, but third, to show the peculiarity of 66 is that the triangle of number 36, which is not only triangular, but is also a square number. 6 times 6, 36. So numbers which are both triangular and square are even rare than doubly triangular numbers. So the first 3 are 1, 36, and to get another one is 1, 2, 2, 5. Thus, 666 is a triangle of such a number, makes it very remarkable number indeed. The next such number is very difficult. This is where you get the triangular numbers. So you can even follow them in terms of which one is the first triangular number, which one is the second, and so forth and so on. Now, Revelation makes use of numbers like 6, and 6 is a triangle number. Revelation makes use of number 4, which is a square number, and Revelation makes use of 42 months, which is a rectangular number. So, and then again 144, which is a square number, and then you get 666, which is a triangle number. It is the 36s triangular number, and also makes use of 1,260, which is a rectangular number. Now, he uses these numbers and he associates them with different characters in this cosmic battle, not accidentally. So for instance, let's speak Revelation 13:18 and see how he makes the connection 13:18 and 17:9. Revelation 13, verse 18. So in verse 18, this calls for wisdom. Let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. 6. Revelation chapter 17, verse 9. You see the connection, verse 9. This calls for a mind with wisdom, uses almost the same phrase. This calls a mind with wisdom, the 7 heads and 7 mountains on which the woman is seated. So there's what we call a literary connection between these two passages. These literary connections that are clear in the text of Revelation are clues, providing that the peculiarities of 666 were of great significance to John. He knew them and he made use of them. Hence, this serves to show that this argument is neither speculative or midrashic. However, some arguments around these numbers are speculative and tentative. That's one we agree. When it comes to some arguments around this, but sometimes we speculate, sometimes we are trying to, it's very tentative, but it's very clear that John knew these numbers and he made use of them. It's very clear, especially when you look at the literary connection that comes in chapter 13, verse 18 and 17, verse 9. First, it is the connection between 13, 18 and 17, and second is the connection between 13, 18 and 21, 17. Look at chapter 21 and verse 17. He also measured it 144 cubits, which 144, which is a square number. Cubit, and then by human measurement, he said by human measurement, which is also an angel's measurement. By human measurement, which is also an angel's measurement. And yet, when he's talking about a triangular number, which is 666, he calls it a human number in chapter 13 there. This one is the 144, which is a square number associated with the things of God, associated with the people of God. He says it is a measurement, a human measurement, but it is also an angel's measurement, okay? But in chapter 13, this is not what he says about 666, but there's some connection there. In chapter 13 there, he says, let the one who has understanding calculate the number of the beast. It is the number of a man, and his number 666. And yet, in 21, verse 17, he says, a human measurement, but which is also an angel's measurement. Okay? So in 13, 18, the number of the beast is introduced by the same phrase, the one here is the wisdom. Let him who was intelligent calculate. Okay? The same phrase, again, is used. A similar introduction is given in 17, verse 9. To interpreting the 7 heads of the beast, he uses the same phrase. Here is the intelligence with the one who has wisdom. So these literary connections, they mean a lot in the interpretation of numbers. So the resemblance between the two passages is clearly deliberate in Revelation. And the variation between them is very typical of John's stylistic habit of varying the precise form of expressions he repeats. Now, by omitting is, estin in Greek, and exchanging the synonymous nous, this is and Sophia, the first 7 words of chapter 13, verse 18 becomes the first 6 words of 17:9. John must have intended the formula to make a link between the two passages, which are in any case closely related, because these are the two great passages of beastology. When you are doing your beastology, the doctrine of the beast in Revelation, you deal with chapter 13, you also deal with chapter 17 of the book of Revelation. And then it's just deliberately that John uses the same phraseology together. So you want us to understand one through another. So when we get stuck in chapter 13 with the doctrine of the beast, chapter 17 is going to help us to understand. So the reason why he put those literary connections so that one should help us to understand another. It's a very deliberate way of bringing those passages together. Okay? So chapter 13, which is the riddle of the number of the beasts, concludes, introduces the figure of the beast from the sea, assisted in the later parts of the chapter by the beast from the land. But two features of the of descriptions of the beast remain unexplained in chapter 13. Number one is 7 heads and 10 horns. He doesn't give us the meaning in chapter 13 because he knows that the second chapter of the beastology, which is 17, is going to provide the meaning of what he means by the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The meaning comes in chapter 17. Even though the mortal wound received by one of the heads in chapter 13, verse 3, is a key event in chapter 13. So the reader is not taught what the heads represent or which of them is wounded. It doesn't tell us. Now, explanation of the heads and the horns of the beast is reserved. It doesn't give us the explanation until chapter 17, which is the second passage, the second text of beastology, verse 7 up to 17, which is the second major passage about the beast in Revelation. So the explanation of the heads and the horns of the beast is introduced at this point because it is necessary to explain the judgment of the harlots who ride on the beast. So this will occur when the beast, more precisely the beast which is the 8th and the 7th head in chapter 17, verse 11, and his allies, the 10 horns, 10 against the harlot and destroy her in 17, 16 to 17. Thus the repeated formula that we get in chapter 13, verse 18, and chapter 17, verse 9, so they link together the two major complementary passages about the beast. In each case introduces an explanation which involves numerical calculation. So where are we going? So in 17 verse 9, John explains the 7 heads of the beast as 7 hills on which the woman sits. As in 13 verse 18, the formula may at first seem to introduce a riddle which conceals the identification of the beast as Nero. But when you get to chapter 17, verse 9, it may at first seem to introduce a riddle which conceals the identification of the harlot as the city of Rome, built on 7 hills. But, as in 13:18, so in 17:9, we soon see the mystery is not the real point. Because Rome was built on the 7 hills, was extremely well known that when he's talking about 7 hills and everybody will be able to associate in first century, he's talking about Rome because it was built on 7 hills. So the indication of the harlot's identity required no great intelligence, but referring to its 7 hills, John was not concealing the Babylon's identity as Rome. It was very clear. So when he's using Babylon as an identity of Rome or Rome, so he was not trying to conceal anything. As we have noticed, the number 666 is a doublet triangle. Is a doublet triangle of 8. And the way he explains now in chapter 17, you'll see, 6 is a triangle of 36, which is a triangle of 8. So, or to put the same point in a perhaps more relevant way, 666 is the 8th doublet triangle number, because remember 6 is a triangle of 36, and 36 is a triangle of 8. Now let's go to chapter 17 and see and hear what John is talking about when he's talking about the beast. When it's now is trying to give us now the identity a little bit of the beast. As we know that 6 is a doublet triangle, chapter 17, and we read verse, which verse is that? 9. So this calls for a mind with wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains on which the woman is seated, and then there are also 7 kings, 5 of whom have fallen, and one is, the other one is yet to come. And when he does come, he must remain only a little while. As for the beasts, that was and is not, it is an 8th, but it belongs to the 7. It is an 8th, and it is belong to the 7. So this should ring a bell of the doubly nature of 666. Remember, 6 is a triangle of 36, which is a triangle of 8. In other words, is this to say 666 is the eighth doubly triangle number. And when John is explaining about the beast here, the beast here in chapter 17, this is what he says. As for the beast in verse 11, that was and is not, is an eighth, but it belongs to the seven. So this phrase of is coming, even though it belongs to the ones that have already gone, the seventh one, is the same way he explains in chapter 13, verse 2 of the wound that was healed. You know, it is the myth, the legend of the return of Nero. So what was difficult to understand, he concealed in chapter 13, becomes a little clear in chapter 17. So much that whatever happened in the past, is already gone, but is coming in another form. So he says, as for the beast that I've already explained in chapter 13, who belongs to the seven, is an eighth king, which is going to come. But remember, he belongs to the seven. So which means he's part of those that have already gone. The riddle is now becoming a little clear, especially when you follow the list of the kings or the emperors that came. And then those who have got the history of the first century, they will just pick it that it's talking about Nero. They will just pick it's talking about Nero, who is already gone, but is also coming. By also coming is using now the legend of the return of Nero in order to present the theology of persecution is not gone forever. It's coming. It's coming through another way. So when you see persecution coming, so what comes to mind is Nero is back. Not Nero as a person, but Nero in form of the persecuting power against believers. And then he makes use of 666 because of the double nature of being a double triangular number there. So we have noted that numbers of this kind were thought, they are very rare, were thought of in a numbered series of according to their place in that series. So thus, Nero's number 666 not only reveals his isopsephism, that he is the beast, but it also at the same time as the eighth doubly triangular number reveals that he is the eighth and thus related to the seven heads of the beast as an eighth. Perhaps, though it is impossible, and I know that many New Testament scholars, the one who's done this job is Richard Bockham. Many Revelation scholars have come to agree with his findings that the beast that we find in Revelation is a reference. John is referring to Nero, and he picks the theology behind of persecuting power to bring something to minds in minds of the readers. So much that now we know what he meant in the first century, and we know the principle behind is that persecution will always come. Is always a reality. That's the point he wants to communicate. So perhaps, though it is impossible to be sure of this, John also noticed that one of the first seven doubly triangular number is 6. If this one is not convincing you, the first triangular number, if you go back to the table the first triangular number that you come is 6 that he uses in the third one. So which is very, very important. And sometimes some scholars will go as far as saying 6 actually is number 7 reduced to 1. So number 7 is used as a number of perfection, as a number of completeness, and then 6 will never reach 7. So 6 is the number which is reduced of 1. It's the number of man, which will never be 7. So, and because it is 3 times 6, 6, 6, which means no matter how many times it is attempts to be 7, it will never be 7. It is just 6, 6, 6 is the number of man. It's which means it's a failing to be 7. So they conveying the idea of failure in there. So whatever the beast does against the people of God, we will never succeed, in other words. So it's failure upon failure upon failure. So it's 7 reduced to 1. And yet when it comes to 144, it's like it's elevated to the number of angels, because this is what John says. 144 is a measurement of man, which is also a measurement of an angel. There's idea of elevation in 144. There's idea of reducing in 666. So, but the main points of the numerological connection between 6, 6, and 8 must be to show that Nero's relationship to the 7 heads as an eighth. So this is how he explains in chapter 17 the reason why, he begins to number those kings, the number 1, the number 2. So he wants everybody to know that Nero is the 8th one. He belongs to the 7, but he's the 8th who is to come. He was to come because of the belief that he was going to come. If he died, he was going to resurrect. If he did not die, he was going to appear. But John uses that not to endorse the idea of saying he's going to come, but to bring the idea of to say persecution is not gone, is going to come back. Is there, is the reality that will come in different forms. So somehow that even the presence of Domitian is somehow like the incarnation of Nero has come. So what is behind is not a person. 6 is a persecuting power that is there. So maybe to bring this together, let's see if we can connect this with 144, 666 and 144. In chapter 13, verse 18, the one who has intelligence is invited to calculate the number of the beasts, for it is the number of a human being. That's what it says. And the figure in chapter 13, verse 18 is very clear that it's given that is 666. This is the beast number, but it's the number of a human being. That's what it says. Now, in 21, verse 17 of Revelation, we are told that the angel who showed John the New Jerusalem measured its wall in 144 cubits by measure of a human being. That is an angel's number. Now, there is not only the parallel between the phrase, these phrases that we find, but also there's contrasts between the identification of the firsts and the number of the beasts, and that of the second and the measure of an angel. In the first one, in chapter 13, verse 18, the beast number is said to be that of a human being. But in the second, the measure of a human being is said to be, it is the measure of an angel. So we don't only have some connections in terms of similarities of the phrase that is used, but also there's contrast there. So the parallel that we get in these two passages and the contrast that we get in surely suggests that whereas the beast is humanity debased, the beast is humanity debased, the New Jerusalem represents humanity exalted to the position of the angels. So, of course, 21 verse 17 is inspired by Ezekiel 40 verse 5, which refers to the angel as a man and explains that the kind of cubit is measuring rod, measures swords at the long rather than the common cubit. Yeah, 7 is completion. Is fullness, is completeness of something, is not only 7. We've got about 3 numbers in Revelation. They convey the same idea of completeness. They convey the idea of something in its fullness.
It can be good or bad.
Yeah, it can be good or bad. Yes. By telling us the cubits according to the measure of man, that is an angel, John intends something less prosaic, a sign that the calculation is in some sense the obverse of the one we get in 13 verse 18. Now, the parallel and contrast between chapter 13, 18, and 21, they invite us to relate the numbers given in the two texts. 666 in chapter 13, verse 18, 144 in chapter 21, verse 17. We need to relate them. Just as 66 is a numerical value of the beast, written in Hebrew character, and also 144 is also the numerical value of angelos, angels, written in Hebrew character. So that's the contrast we have already discerned between the bestial and the angelic is confirmed by and reinforced by the gematria indicated into. So he deliberately uses this one to show 66 is like a humanity, which is the best, to the point of beasts, and 144 as humanity, which is elevated to the level of angels. And remember, 66 is a triangular number, and John associates 666 to anything evil, anything debased, anything reduced to beastology, and he uses 144 to the things of God, anything elevated to the angel. He expected, I think, the readers to understand, because this was normal in understanding of the first century readers, and he brings those numbers. And he's very consistent the way he uses the numbers. So he picks the triangular numbers associating with evil. He picks square numbers associated with the people of God. And then he will go for rectangular numbers to describe the period of time. And then he attributes one to the people of God, another one to the beast. Let's see first the contrast. Maybe we'll be able to come back to those passages again. Now, the number 66 is used in Revelation as an evil number. And 144 is used as a good number. There's also an obvious arithmetical contrast between the two numbers. Why? 666 is a triangular number, but 144 is a square number. In fact, 144 is the 12th square number. That is the square of 12. As such, it is the number which best represents the New Jerusalem. So of all the square numbers, John picked 144, not because it's just a square number, but it's also the number 12 square number, which represents very well the New Jerusalem, which has the foundation of 12. So humanity debased, that is 6, is to the level of the beasts bears the triangular number, 666. Humanity raised or elevated to the level of the angels in the New Jerusalem, surrounded by the square of 12. So the measurement of the city, and it was 12,000, 12,000 stadia and 144 cubits, certainly also relates to the people of God, because they are all square numbers, who are reckoned by the symbolic number of 144,000 in 7:4-8. Because in chapter 7, when he's talking about the people of God, he gives them the square number of 144,000, and the 1,000, which is a perfect cube of 10 times 10 times 10. He does it in a very consistent way. And when he begins to describe the city in Revelation chapter 21, because he has already given us a clue that by city he means the people of God, because the Jerusalem stands for the people of God in Revelation. You remember that? Because he gives a clue that in chapter 21, he is taught, he hears, "Come, I show you the bride, the wife of the Lamb." And then when time comes to see the bride, the wife of the Lamb, he sees the city. And now the city, the measurement of the city is exactly 144, which he has already given the people of God in chapter 7, verse 1-9. So the argument that John is playing a serious game with triangular square numbers is really The triangular number representing the beasts, the square number, the people of God, is very strengthened by observation that he also uses the third related class of numbers, the rectangular numbers, for specific purpose. So what he does is that he gets a triangular number, which is an evil number for him. He associates it with the beasts, which is humanity reduced to a beast, Christology. And then he gets a square number, and then he elevated the end to the level of angels. And then he goes to use now rectangular numbers for a specific reason. Now, he gets 42 months, 42, which is a rectangular number, and 1,260 days. These are not, all these numbers are rectangular numbers. And then he uses those numbers to explain the period of time in which both the people of God, 144, and the beasts, 66, they're all part of this cosmic battle. This period they are all involved in is characterized by 1,260 days for a reason. Is also characterized by 42 months for a reason. So 42 has to do with a period of time. 1,260 days, a rectangular number, period of time. And then is very specific. Let's go and see how he does it. Let's go to Revelation 11 with the two witnesses, for instance. Look at verse 1. Then I was given a measuring rod like a staff, and I was told, rise and measure the temple of God. And you know the temple is standing for the people of God in Revelation. Measure and the idea of measuring, let me remind you, the idea of measuring is the same idea of sealing in chapter 7. In chapter 7, he uses the idea of sealing the people of God, and measuring, they convey the same idea of preserving or protecting the people of God. So to measure the temple here stands for the people of God, has the idea of protecting. So rise and measure the temple of God, the altar, and those who worship there, but do not measure the court outside the temple. Leave that out, for it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the city for 42 months. Now here we have the city, we have the temple courts. The city stands for the people of God in in Revelation. Even the temple courts stand for the people of God. Even the temple itself is the people. So there's, on the one hand, the church is protected spiritually. Measure the people of God. So we have the eternal security. God is there's what we call spiritual protection of the people of God, which is being conveyed in a symbolic way of measuring the temple. So measure the temple, so it conveys an idea of how much the people of God are spiritually protected, but that does not mean that they are immune to persecution. As a temple of God, we are spiritually protected, but as the temple courts, we are not. We are exposed to persecution. As a city, we are exposed to persecution. Because the city in Revelation stands for the people of God, the temple courts for the people of God, and the temple itself, the people of God. So now when he's using the temple, he says, as the temple of God, we are spiritually protected, but as the temple courts and the city, we will be persecuted. And then, because persecution is something that goes to the people of God, and we feel it physically, but we shouldn't forget that as a temple, we've been measured, we've been protected. Now here, he uses 42 months. This is what he says. The temple leave that, it is given over to the nations, and they will trample the city for 42 months. Okay? In verse 3, he says, and I will grant authority to my 2 witnesses, and they will prophesy for 1,260 days clothed. Now, these two, on the one hand, we see that 1,260 days is a rectangular number describing the same period of time, but conveying the idea of the church mission of witnessing. So it has been given 1,260 days to witness. At the same time, as we are witnessing in 1,260 days, we are also exposed to persecution, which is 42 months. Do you get that? Do you get it? So it's the same period of time. So as we look at what this period of time, the age from 42 months perspective, what we see is the persecution of believers. When we look at the same period of time from the perspective of 1,260 days, what we see is the church busy witnessing. It's the period that the church is actually busy doing the mission of witnessing. But what is happening at the same time is the church is being persecuted. So to convey the idea of persecution, he uses 42 months. To convey the idea of witnessing, he uses 1,260 days, talking about the same period of time. And so, for instance, where does he get it? He goes in the Old Testament, 1,260 days or 42 months. Let me start with 42 months, for instance. The journey of the people of God, crossing the Jordan, before crossing the Jordan, when they just leave Mount Sinai, before crossing the Jordan, when you read that in Numbers chapter 42, I think, you count how many encampments, how many camps, they actually made. 42 camps, the Israelites, in the wilderness. So moving from one place to another, they spend a time in a camp, and after some time they move. Before the crossing of Jordan River, it's about 42 campings that they did. So by 42, when 42 is mentioned, it rings a bell of the period the people of God were going in the wilderness. Do you get it? 42 months. Now 1,260 days, which is 3 years and a half, it has a connotation, first and foremost, of the time of Elijah. Elijah is given a mission to prophesy. He's bringing judgment against Ahab, and then the period that he did there, and then the judgment 3 years and a half of the shutting of the heavens, that it should not rain for 3.5 days, which is exactly 1,260 days, bringing the idea of the period of witnessing and prophesying. So it's symbolic. The association is that this is a period where the church is busy witnessing, prophesying in the sense of witnessing the testimony of Christ, but at the same time, we are not immune to persecution. So we are being protected by God spiritually, but we also go through persecution. So these two numbers, the rectangular numbers, are talking about the period of time, but the square number is the things of God, the people of God, and the triangular number is for the beast that he uses in Revelation. Any questions? Yes, it's just the same. John uses that a lot in Revelation. So, for instance, he says, he's talking about the bride. In Revelation chapter 21, he says, blessed are the ones who are invited to the guest. So the bride and those who are invited is one and the same people in Revelation 21. So those who worship the altar and the temple is the same symbolism. The big idea is the people of God before we get to the details. And that's where we see the spiritual side of protection. So God's people are spiritually protected, and God's people, they stand with the symbolism of the temple, the symbolism of the altar, the symbolism of those who worship. So it's like an emphatic way of presenting. So they describe one and the same people. Those who worship are not different from the altar, no different from the temple. So the temple symbolizes the people of God, the altar, the people of God, and those who worship the people of God. And then it brings the idea of these are measured, but the same people of God, again, is the temple courts and the city. So as the city, we are going through persecution. As the temple court, the people of God is being persecuted. But as the temple and the altar and those who worship, the people of God are spiritually protected. So the idea of measuring is the same idea of sealing in Revelation 7. waits until the people of God are sealed. So to seal and to measure conveys the idea of protecting. Because this is what we get from Ezekiel chapter 40, the idea of measuring. It conveys the idea of protecting. So symbolically what John is trying to convey is that in this period of time, the church is busy witnessing and the Lord is looking after the people of God, but that does not mean that we are not going to get persecuted. Maybe some of us maybe even ended up being killed, because this is what we get from the two witnesses. They are actually killed at the end of their witnessing, and then they rise again. Not two individuals, but the church, the people of God. Let me read this part for you. So John modifies. There's a number in Daniel which is 1,290, right? Yeah, and he uses that one. There's also another number, 1335. Let me just read this part for you before I get a number of questions from it. Let me read this part on the rectangular numbers. The numbers 42 and 1,260, which John uses to designate the apocalyptic period of the end time. This is how he described this period we are in, starting from the death, the resurrection, and the ascension of Christ until the time is going to come. This period is the apocalyptic time of end time, and John describes it as 42 months or 1,260 days. You know, they are all rectangular numbers. This is the period of the reign of the beast, in which he persecutes the saints. If you read in chapter 13, verse 5, the beast is actually persecuting the saints of the Great Tribulation. But it's not just the period of the beast persecuting the saints, it's also the period where the church is busy preaching the gospel of Christ, you know, and protected. So it is the period in which the woman representing the church, who represent the heavenly reality of the people of God, is protected by God in the wilderness, the same period of time. So when you, in one angle of this, what we see this period of time as the period when the beast is actually like controlling things, looking at what is happening in our world. So from one angle, you see that is the beast who is reigning here, and at the same time, he is actually persecuting the saints and killing them. But on the other hand, we see that this is the same period of time that God is also protecting his people. By protecting, remember, it is a spiritual protection of the people of God, even if they are killed, even if they are being persecuted, but God is looking after people, the people of God. So we see that as 42 months. And then on the other end, we see 160 days like the time of persecution. It's the same period of time. Is the period in which the woman, representing the heavenly reality of the people of God, is protected by God in the wilderness. That is, the church is kept spiritually safe, while outwardly the church is being persecuted. That's why you see, so the spiritually safe is the temple. The outwardly being persecuted is the temple courts, the one we get in Revelation chapter 11. So outwardly we see the church being persecuted, but we see spiritually the church is actually kept safe. The church is safe, and no one is going to get lost. God is looking after God's people. Now the image in chapter 11, verse 1 to 2, the Gentiles, they trample the holy city for 42 months. But the sanctuary is protected. Actually, your Bible uses not Aaron, the Greek one. I think they use Naos. I think what is protected in Revelation 11 is not Aaron in the Greek word for temple. The whole temple, including the outer courts, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies, is Aaron, is the whole temple in Greek. But Naos is the sanctuary. Most of the time, the word Naos is used, if not for the holy place and Holy of Holies, it's just a Holy of Holies. So when they use Naos, is that this, when the Bible says, for instance, don't you know that you are the temple of God? It doesn't use Aaron. The Greek uses the Naos. meaning the sanctuary, the actual temple, the place where God resides. So when John says that go and measure the temple, he doesn't use the word hieron in Greek. Go and measure the sanctuary. So the sanctuary is protected spiritually by God, even when believers, they go through persecution, but they are actually protected. They are safe spiritually. This is what he's trying to convey. So this is the image. The Gentiles, they trample the holy city for 42 months, but the sanctuary is protected as the same meaning. The forces of evil, they persecute the church, but our true spirituality, the true spiritual reality of the church is unarmored. Finally, the same period of time, the same period is that in which the two witnesses prophesy, according to chapter 11, verse 3. That is the church as the prophetic community. The two witnesses is the people of God, the church as the prophetic community. So they bear prophetic witness to the world against the powers of evil. The period in question belongs, in a sense, now because we are talking about 42 months and also 1,260 days, so we can say that this period, in a sense, it belongs both to the beasts, it also belongs to the people of God. In a way, it belongs to the beast because that's the period where the beast is reigning and also persecuting the believers and killing them. In another way, it's also the period of the people of God that they are busy prophesying and also preaching the gospel. So it is the period of the beast reign. It's also the period of the church witness. It is the period of his victory over the saints, according to chapter 13, verse 7. And this victory is outward, but it's also the period of the victory of the people of God over him as we witness. You see that? This is very important. Because in chapter 15, verse 2, you see that the victory is given. How is the church, people of God, how are they having victory over the devil and the forces of evil as we preach the gospel of Christ? So in a way, we see that the devil, the evil forces of God, they take victory over the people of God. In chapter 13, verse 7, which is the outward victory, which is something to do with persecution, the physical persecution. But on the other end, as we prophesy, as we preach the gospel, we take victory. The church is growing. So let me conclude before I give you time for questions. Now, if a triangular number represents the beasts, 666, and the square number represents the saints, 144, right? Then it may seem appropriate for the third class of number, which is rectangular number, 42 months or 1,026, to designate this ambiguous period in which the beasts and the saints, they oppose each other. Can I read that again? If a triangular number represents the beasts, a square number represents the people of God. Rectangular number now, it designates the period in which these two are together. The beasts and the saints, they oppose each other during this period of time. So in this period of time, we have, on the one hand, we have the beasts and the forces of evil, which is 666. On the other hand, the same period of time, we've got the people of God, the followers of the Lamb, which is 144 here. They all live in the same period of time, which is 42 months or 1,266 days, opposing each other. In a certain way, we see it's like the victory of the beasts over the people of God. In another way, it is the victory of the church over the forces of evil, depending on how you look at it. So this is the church age which spans from the Christ ascension to his return. Because it is a long period of time, dear friends, John uses the number 1,000 years to describe it in chapter 20. So when he goes to chapter 20, talking about the same period of time, he gives the number 1,000. So this same period of time, it is 1,260 days for a reason. It is 42 months for a reason. It is also 1,000 for a reason. It's a long period of time, So 1,000 years is not a different period of time. It's the same period in which the church is busy preaching the gospel of Christ and also being persecuted. Moreover, since 12 and 30, the numbers which divide the year into months, and the months into days, and by which John is able to make 3.5 years equivalent for 42 months or 1,260 days, are also rectangular numbers, because if you pick 12 is a rectangular number, 30 rectangular numbers, these are the ones we use when we want to divide into years or into days, are also rectangular numbers. Rectangular numbers may have seemed to be appropriate kind of numbers to use to describe a period of time. A period of time. The period itself is borrowed from Daniel, whose phrase is a time, times, and a half of time. Even John uses that. John uses to make the connection with Daniel clear in John chapter 12, verse 14. But the alternative specification of the same period to be bound in Daniel are 1,290 days. This is what he uses in, and also 1,335 days. So John is an independent theologian. So he picks some ideas from the Old Testament and then he uses it to achieve the message that, to achieve what he wants to achieve. So it has never been satisfactorily explained why John ignored these numbers, because these numbers we have in Daniel, 1,290 days, 1,335, these are already biblical numbers. He would have picked these numbers to explain, to describe this period of time, but John ignored 1,290 days of Daniel. He ignored 1,335 of Daniel, and then he used 1,660 days, and he uses 42 months for his own reason. Okay? We don't know why he did that. Now, the calculation, after all, is artificial because it requires years of just 2 months and of just 30 days, allowing neither some longer months nor intercalated months. So the reason we have suggested is that John preferred rectangular numbers. But furthermore, he must surely have noticed that these are not just any rectangular numbers, but rather special ones that he has picked. So these details may be complicated, they may somehow confuse us, but what you must get is that John knows that it's a long period of time. To convey the idea of this is a long period of time, he uses 1,000 years. To convey the idea that this period is a period where there's opposition going on between the people of God on the one hand and the followers, the forces of evil, and then he uses other numbers, 1,260 days, to convey the symbolic way of the church that is being protected, saved by God as they proclaim the gospel of Christ, but 42 months to say the church is not immune to persecution. So all these details, you may put them aside, but this is the point. So there's a way you can talk about the victory of the church over the beasts. There's a way you can talk about the victory of the beasts over the church, depending on how you explain it. So the witnessing of the people of God as we preach the gospel, that's victory. That's fire that comes out of the mouth of the two witnesses. This is what it says. So whenever they want to kill them during this time, no one will be able to silence the church during this period of time. The only time that the church will be somehow silenced is as we get toward the end of this period, because the two witnesses, no one was able to kill them during their time of witnessing. Each time they come closer, they want to kill them, there will be fire coming out of that symbolic way, a symbolic way of saying no one will be able to silence the church during even if the church is killed. We hear a lot of stories of the killing, the persecution of believers in the different parts of the world, but the gospel of Jesus is still going. No one is going to be able to silence the church during this period of time the church will be silenced a little bit as we approach the second coming of Jesus. Because at the end of this period, the two witnesses were killed, all of them, according to chapter 11, verse 2. They are now killed, and then for about 3 days or so, 3 days and a half. Because remember, when we talk about 1,260 days, in terms of years, it is actually 3 years and a half, isn't it? In terms of years. Now, Revelation does not only make use of 3 years and a half, it also makes use of 3 days and a half, which is the shortest period ever. Because 3 years and a half is this long period the gospel is being preached. 3 days and a half is the shortest period of time before the coming of the Lord. At that particular time, persecution may be intense to the point where the witnessing of the church will look like it has been silenced. That's the meaning of the killing of those two witnesses at the end. They are killed. It's like now the church is being silenced, and it's not going to take long, the return of the Lord. That's the symbolic way of the witnesses. So it gives us comfort, dear friends. We hear a lot of passing on of our friends, persecution of believers everywhere we go. But we have a comforting message in the book of Revelation that as long as we are still in this period of time, no one will be able to silence the people of God. The church will never be completely killed in the sense of the witnessing is silenced. Even the most difficult parts of the world, the gospel is penetrating. So people are already making, missions group. They are going in various parts where there's huge persecution, because we know this is what Revelation tells us. The two witnesses is the church witnessing with the power of the gospel going on. This is how we win victory. We win victory as we share the gospel of Christ. Some of them are being, when I visited Mauritania for the first time, upon arrival, I was traumatized, because I know it is 99.9% Islamic, and evangelizing Muslims is illegal, and then it is by capital punishment. When I arrived there, one of the missionaries was killed the very day I arrived, because he was found distributed Christian tracts to Mauritanian. You don't do that. You don't evangelize Mauritanians. It's actually punishment, which is capital punishment. And then I'm at the airport, I hear that story, and I went there for ministry. Traumatized. But it's not possible. What is amazing, dear friend, is that I spent 2 weeks in Mauritania, so 3 or 4 days before my end of ministry there, about 2 Mauritanians came in the night, sharing with me the greatest penetration of the gospel. Encouraging me to say, brother, we've come in the night to see you. We are aware of what you are doing here. I've managed to share the gospel with a lot of people in my family, and then we do it in a secret way. The gospel of Jesus is winning. It's moving. And then I took a picture of him, but he said, please do not share this picture on social media, otherwise I'll be in trouble. But we are pushing with the gospel of Christ. In as much as some are being killed, some are being persecuted, but the gospel of Jesus is winning. We are moving. No one is going to be able to silence the church. It happened in the 16th century. It happened. We've got stories of how persecution is everywhere, but it is victory of the two witnesses of the gospel of Christ. We are soldiering on because of the power of the gospel. Any questions? Yes. The rapture theology is complicated. So whenever I hear a question of rapture, so my question is always like, can you define what do you mean by rapture? If rapture means escaping a period of time, because this is what it means in many parts of the dispensationalism. They take rapture as a way of escaping the Great Tribulation. And most of the time they take rapture over there at the beginning of chapter 4 of Revelation, which means the church has to be raptured here and avoid escaping this period of time we call the Great Tribulation. And the church will come back later here. If rapture has got a connotation of avoiding or escaping tribulation, this is not what the Bible teaches about rapture. If you are telling me rapture is the meeting of God, of Christ when He comes, the people of God will be risen and they will go and welcoming the Lord. If it's idea of welcoming, then I see this is what the Bible is talking about. But the reason why I always reject the idea of the rapture, because the connotation of rapture is that of escaping persecution, running away from hard times and so forth. This is not what the Bible explains about the church. The church is not just a temple. The church is not just a sanctuary. The church is also a temple court that will be trampled. The church is also the city that will be trampled by the Gentiles. So he's talking about persecution. Now, the 3 days and after the breath of life that will come in them, and then is talking about the return, the actual return of the Lord Jesus. When the Lord Jesus comes, it's either referring to the period where the church will be given strength again, and awaiting the coming of the Lord, and then welcoming Him, and then start eternity. There's nothing like dispensation. So all we are waiting for, all of us together, is the return of the Lord Jesus. When He comes, we will welcome Him. All those who died, and all our brothers and sisters who died in the Lord, they will rise up again. And when they rise, it's not rapture in the sense of escaping something. It's rapture in the sense of welcoming the Lord who is coming. He's coming, and then we start eternity with Him. In that sense, then I believe, if this is what people mean by rapture, then I believe that. If it's the rapture that has been propagated for a long time, idea of escaping what, I don't think the Bible teaches rapture in those lines.